All right, so big thanks to Ted Glover, who joined us from the Daily Norseman, talking about the Vikings, giving us a little insight into the other side of the fence, a little peek over the other side of the fence, and finding out a little bit more about the Vikings themselves. And then, obviously, as I mentioned, there's a lot of Bengals connections with the Vikings there, certain players, coaches that are there. So good stuff from Ted. Give him a follow and check all of his stuff out at the Daily Norseman. We're going to get to our preseason game number one, things we'll be looking for. But before we do, there is a number of pieces of news that have been coming out of Bengals training camp, and some of it has been positive, and yet again, it's kind of that dreaded thing that happens again this time of year as training camp kicks off, and it's the injury bug. The Bengals last week they unfortunately lost their first round pick, William Jackson III, the cornerback out of Houston. They lost him for a significant period of time. We don't know exactly what the amount of time will be, but he did tear a pectoral muscle and had some surgery to repair that. And now another big contributor that the Bengals were probably even more so than Jackson, that the Bengals were looking to rely on in 2016 is fourth-round pick Andrew Billings, the defensive tackle out of Baylor. He had his leg crumbled up upon in the joint practice with the Vikings on Wednesday and was carted off of the field, could not get up under his own power. But later on Wednesday afternoon, Bengals.com editor Jeff Hobson noted that there's cautious optimism that Billings could come back at a pretty short window of time. The biggest fear was potentially a cartilage tear. If anything, he's having an MRI on Thursday. So, Scott, I'll kick that over to you. What do you think the fallout is, and how the Bengals would try and recover if Billings was to miss a significant period of time?
Yeah, this was one I was just crushed when I heard it because I heard this on the way home on the radio, on the local sports radio here, and that was one of the first things I heard when I turned the radio on was Billings was carted off the field. And like you said, after William Jackson going down just last week, the last thing we needed is another first-round pick being hurt. And the worst thing about it is all the hype all the fans had before the draft of this guy being a first round pick. All the talking heads loved him. All the draft, everyone who followed the draft seemed to think this guy was a stud. He, for as young as he was, as well as he did while he was at Baylor, he just seemed to be. And everyone has kind of been ready to move on from Pecco. He just seems to be a perfect fit for Bengals fans. And here's a guy who's finally going to get a chance. And same with the William Jackson thing. The one thing that really hurts is as good as he's done for camp and during camp, you don't get to see him in a game because he's obviously going to miss Friday. Who knows how many air games he's going to miss, and that's just the one, probably the most frustrating thing is just the idea that he's not going to get a chance to make that push. For the games, he's not going to get a chance to push, Pecco or push any of the other people ahead of him for playing time. With the Bengals notoriously not giving a whole lot of playing time to the defensive rookies in their first year, like they did with Drake Kirkpatrick, like they did with Darqueze Dennard. How they just, after you in the first round, not go to the bench. Here's someone I think a lot of Bengals fans are kind of hoping secretly, well, he'll be the one exception. And of course, if you can't play, you as Ted was saying, you're not going to make the team in the tub or whatever. That saying was from Zimmer, which is a point that he's going to have a hard time fighting on the field and break that Bengals, you know, practice or mantra of not playing you if you can't get on there. And I think that's the worst thing is not him not getting a chance to prove it on the one, I guess, positive is if there is, I mean, there's never a thing that was a positive, but the one nice thing is of all the positions, and this is something we mentioned last week in our podcast, is that defensive tackle is one of the stronger positions on the team. They have Geno Atkins, who's obviously all-pro, one of the top tackles in the NFL today. And then with him, you have Pecco, who had a solid rebound year last year. Pat Sims played really well when he had a chance. They have Brandon Thompson, who should probably be back from the PUP list in time. So you've got a couple big guys right behind Pecco, and then you have they drafted Marcus Hardison recently, so you have another one there. And then you have Deshaun Williams. So they have enough solid bodies, and if Billings wasn't going to get on the field, it's not as devastating as it could have been. I mean, it's obviously not losing A.J. Green or Dalton. So from that in the grand scheme of things, it's not as bad as it could be, especially if it's short term. It just really hurts your depth and hurts anything you want to try to do with the defensive line. And the biggest thing is, it keeps him from having a chance to show that he should be higher up in the depth chart. So it kind of makes you wonder, well, what are they going to do now with Sims and with Thompson? You can probably assume they're both going to make it now. If any of them was a potential cut down day casualty, they're probably both going to make it depending on the severity. And if it's not bad enough, they might just put Billings. I could see them putting on the pup just because they have all that depth. So it will be kind of interesting to see what the news of this injury, how it is, and then what they do with it. Because I'd love to see him in preseason, but at this point it seems kind of iffy if we'll get to see him.
I definitely think it shakes up the locker room. I mean, the fan base wanted to kind of write off Brandon Thompson and assume the Bengals are going to put him on PUP, but I think that's definitely something that the Bengals are going to have to look at. And I think that the mindset that, oh, well, we have so many defensive tackles, let's just put one of them on PUP. I don't really think that's how NFL teams really think. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, and it's a shame because, all of a sudden this 2016 draft class is kind of dropping like flies a little bit. I mean, it's like, oh, man, another injury, another guy that, Jackson wasn't necessarily slated for a big role on defense. We talked about that last week, and one of the things I said, I think it's kind of the same thing with Billings. He probably wasn't going to start. His role would probably be more prominent than Jackson, but I think Billings would have been a more heavy rotator in the defense than Jackson, and I think even though he wasn't a starter, I think this is more of a blow from an emotional standpoint to the team. Some reports had players taking a knee as he was getting carted off, and it seemed like a pretty serious thing at the time. Now, again, a tweet from Jeff Hobson of Bengals.com noted that they think the Bengals training staff has cautious optimism, and they think at most there could be a cartilage tear. I don't know the time frame on that in terms of recovery, but it sounds far less severe than a ligament being damaged, which we've seen around the league with a number of players so far already. And if you remember last year, there was a big scare with Michael Johnston just after he was brought back in with free agency, and he crumpled down on one of the first training practices of the year, and he ended up coming back and playing for the Bengals throughout the season. So let's hope that's kind of a similar situation. Let's hope that the Bengals do not have any more injury scares, especially to some of their more important people going forward here in 2016. One other little injury update, Tyler Eifert. There was an interesting piece of information given out by Jay Morrison of the Dayton Daily News. Tyler Eifert, it was once believed that the surgery to his ankle that he's currently recovering from was on the outside of the ankle, and that would have a specific time window of recovery where we've been hearing that he would be back maybe week 1, week 2, maybe a little bit beyond that, but should play most of the season. Now Jay Morrison has said that they noted scars on the inside of his ankle, and certain doctors and things like that, we have information of this up on Cincy Jungle. There might be a little more time being missed with that. So a little bit of some enigma there, and we need to kind of keep monitoring that. But some good news, Connor, with the tight end position is that C.J. Uzomah, along with Brandon LaFell, have been playing very well in practices, especially recently. LaFell's been making some plays. C.J. Uzomah is making a lot of plays as a pass catcher. What are your thoughts on those two, their growth that we've been seeing over the past couple of days in training camp practice, and how they might need to step up to help this offense out if guys continue to keep hitting the injury bug?
I mean, yeah, it's a bummer that the team has gotten, hit with all these injuries all of a sudden, but you can't really hope for any better news than what you're hearing right now with LaFell and Uzomah. Obviously, Eifert is going to be a huge loss if he's gone, even for one game of the season, let alone for maybe 4 or 5. And then with Croft still, I believe he's dealing with something or has dealt with something. That's also an issue. But with Uzuma performing well, or reportedly, which obviously reports are just reports until we see it in preseason, but it's good to see that he's progressing. I think the Bengals really want to utilize him, and I think it almost verifies my my bold prediction. I don't know if it was one of our trial runs, but I was like, oh, maybe Uzuma will outperform Tyler Croft in the preseason. I think that's looking pretty good right now. But ultimately, I think what it's going to come down to is that Uzuma's, in terms of the Bengals' tight end depth chart, it really couldn't have gotten any better for them in terms of, like, obviously they got hurt, but Uzuma is mostly going to back up Eifert. He's probably not going to be on the field at the same time as Eifert ever. And so he's more of a pass catcher, whereas Croft is much more of a run blocker, although Croft is pretty good at catching as well. But I'm pretty sure I recall draft analysts calling Croft the best blocking tight end in his draft class. So that's one thing the Bengals have got, is that when Eifert and Croft will potentially both be healthy, that they can be on the field together and work in those two tight end sets and really complement each other in the passing game as well as the run game. But with having a guy like Uzuma potentially step up would be huge for the Bengals and Eifert's absence, as obviously the team is desperate for some pass catching help. And I mean, as I've said before, I think that's kind of blown out of proportion. I think that AJ Green's going to pick up the slack, and maybe the run game will get back to where it was in 2014. But regardless, having LaFell reportedly playing well, which is something we all really hope for with all the cynicism coming out of the New England Patriot fan base, but and having Uzuma performing well, I think it's definitely something that's encouraging. I think the offense is something to look forward to.
Yeah, those are two positions that obviously the Bengals need to have their new players step up, or newer players step up, because of injuries, because of attrition and free agency, things like that. So those are some camp updates, some major camp updates. Again, some good, some negative, mostly in terms of injury. There were some reports also that in the joint practice with the Vikings, the Bengals didn't play very well in those practices. I mean, at this point, it's kind of like, well, who cares as long as guys are healthy? And let's hope for the best with Andrew Billings, because I think he could be a very good player for the Bengals and a very solid rotator for the Bengals. So keep a good thought for the big guy there. Before we get to your fantasy football insider, Scott, and I will start with you, give me one player you'll be watching closely in preseason game number 1, and one thing that you'll be looking for out of the Bengals, aside from being injury-free, obviously. I think that goes without saying. So give me one player you're looking for, you'll be watching very closely, whether it's a starter or a reserve, whoever, and one thing you're hoping to see out of the Bengals in their first preseason game with the Vikings.
I think the one thing, starting with the second part first, that I'm looking for is, or thing I'm watching for, is that offensive line getting some push or some blocking. They have just been dreadful. All the reports from camp this past week were they were just getting blown up by the Bengals defensive line. And so I was kind of hoping, everyone's kind of saying, well, they have Dunlap, they have Atkins, so okay, yeah, they're going up against some pretty good guys. And then the consensus, okay, well, we'll see what happens when the Vikings come to town. We'll see if it gets any better. And everything I've heard from the joint practices is it's not gotten any better. Dalton's been getting a lot of they can't hit him, but they've been getting a lot of pressure on him. They can't get any push. They can't get any running. So that's the thing I want to see, is can they give Dalton and McCarron and Wenning, or whoever they end up using Friday, a chance to throw the ball? And is Hill going to have anywhere to run? I know he struggled last year, and some of the arguments were, well, was it him? Was it Bodine? Was it play? Whatever it was. I just want to see this offensive line look like the top 5, top 10 unit. I think a lot of us think they are. So that's the thing I'm going to be watching, is what that O-line can do. Probably the one player I want to be watching is probably one who, just because he's a wide receiver, and I think we had mentioned him in the past, someone a lot of fans seem to like, whether it's justified or not, is Jake Kumaro. Just because he had a good camp last year, he was on the practice squad. We were really surprised he made it to the Bengals practice squad last year. I just want to see what is he going to do in a game now that he's kind of had his second year. He's had a whole year of the practices of being on the roster. If he's going to make the roster, it seems like this would be his chance to do it. This is his time to really show, is he worth all the hype? Are we just kind of excited because he's a big kid from a small school, or does it feel good story, or is he someone who can really make the NFL? And that's something I think the one guy I really want to see is, can he get open? Can he catch the ball as well as he can in drills and practices?
Yeah, Connor. Great point, Scott. Connor, one guy you're looking at in this first preseason game, and one thing you're looking for out of the Bengals in this first preseason game, aside, as I mentioned, aside from keeping injury free.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback off Scott. This isn't necessarily my guy, but I also think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Rashawn Simonize. As Scott mentioned, with the whole Jay Kumaro thing, is Kumaro's coming from a small school. What's that going to be like? And as someone who attended Azusa Pacific with Terrell Watson, it was fascinating to see Terrell really put on a clinic in the preseason. I was really bummed the Bengals let him go. I think he should start in Cleveland. And I think that those small school guys are definitely important to keep an eye on. I think Simonize is the exact same specimen as Kumaro, but he has a lot more experience and I think a lot more versatility than the former, just because he's played in so many different areas. He's played different styles. We've seen so many Canadian athletes come and make an impact in the NFL, from Cameron Wake to Jarrell Freeman to guys in other camps. I saw a guy in Chargers camp, Dexter McCoyle, who's a 6'4" safety, kind of like Iloka, who's all over the place. I think that people are sleeping on Rashawn Simonize, basically, and obviously it's towards him just because he's one of my boys, because I interviewed him and he seems like an awesome dude, but at the end of the day, he's a lot more agile than Kumaro from what I've seen. And if your best attribute when you're a back end of the roster receiver is your hands, it's probably not a great sign, because you're going to need to basically create separation in order to gain confidence from your quarterback and basically make plays. I think that Simonize has that lateral agility that makes him a valuable asset as a deep threat receiver. Or I should say, not a deep threat, but, he could be a deep threat. But I think as a big man, it's really important to be able to create separation. The hands are something that is kind of expected out of a big receiver, but I think being able to separate is something that is really going to be important for Kumaro and Simonize. But I think Simonize kind of has the upper hand now, at least in my eyes. But the one guy, sorry, I sidetracked there, but the one guy I'm definitely going to keep my eye on is George Iloka. As we mentioned, he obviously had those little we had that little brief courtship with the Vikings, but he ended up signing in Cincinnati. And from all accounts, he's been all over the place, making plays in training camp, perhaps going even a little too hard with the whole, blowing up plays to the point where his coaches are saying, all right, you gotta slow down, and just people saying that he practices harder than anyone they've ever seen practice before, which I really think is awesome. And I'm just excited to see what he's going to look like in his new role. I think he's going to probably take the center fielder. Well, obviously they play too deep, but I think he's going to be more responsible for covering more ground, like Reggie Nelson was when Iloka and Nelson were in the backfield, as Sean Williams kind of transitions into his role in the defense. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see Iloka team up with Drake Kirkpatrick and Adam Jones. We all saw the Jones intentionally bite on a play last year against the Rams and basically give Iloka a free shot at an easy interception, which he ended up picking off for his only pick of the year. I think some of those cues that he'll have with the corners, and obviously it probably isn't going to happen in the preseason game, but I think that it'll be really interesting to see how Paul Guenther utilizes him as kind of the primary safety of the defense in a way. And I guess as the whole concept, I would say, like an entity that I'm looking for, definitely for me is just going to be special teams. I think that's a huge aspect that a lot of fans really overlook in preseason, and it's really, really, really important coming from someone who's been at a training camp every single day this offseason. I think that coaches really, really, really value players who can perform on special teams, especially in the back end of the roster. It can't really be overstated that that guys who are getting first-team reps on special teams are going to be the guys that are making the roster. Because unless a guy has so much promise at his position that a coach thinks that he can be a starter in 2 or 3 years, or probably 1 or 2 years if we're being honest, I think that the guy who performs now with special teams prowess is going to be the guy that makes the team. The Bengals had one of the best special teams units in the NFL last year, and I don't think that they're going to want to let that blow up, because you see what happens with teams when special teams fail. I know last year San Diego had terrible special teams. They drafted a new punter. They are hoping that their special teams is going to help come together now, because it's just one of those things that fans never seem to even consider. Yet the battle of field position is one of the most important reasons why the Bengals had such a hot start last year that no one seemed to talk about, was that Kevin Huber was punting people deep, the gunners were making plays on punts, and then obviously the return men, when Adam Jones was hot, when Brandon Tate would make a nice play or two. I mean, even the Arizona game, he made that one great return that got called back. Those plays are the kind of plays that puts a team from a tie game to a win, or brings a team back from a 3-point deficit. I think those things can't get overstated. I'm really excited to see what happens on special teams, because there's so much more that goes into it than what you see on the field. There's so much coaching that goes on behind the scenes that fans don't really get to see.
Yeah, and if you look back, I was rewatching quite a bit of tape of the Bengals from last season. In that Seattle game, if you remember, Kevin Huber and Darqueze Dennard, who didn't have a great defensive game that afternoon, pinned the Seahawks deep a couple of times, which was actually huge for the Bengals to kind of mount their comeback in that game. So I agree with you on the special teams thing. One thing I'm looking for, aside from the team remaining healthy, I think I'm kind of with Scott. I want to see the run game. I want to see some push up front. I think we know what we're going to get with the pass rush. I think 2014 was kind of an anomaly there. I think they're going to be pretty stout there. I think there's going to be a couple of good players on defense that'll stand out at least early on. But there's going to be, aside from the offensive line push and the running game, a guy I'm really going to watch, because I think it'll probably change as the preseason goes on, but I think he's going to get a lot of time early on, is Tyler Boyd. And it's probably a pretty obvious choice, but I think they're going to give him significant snaps as this first game goes on, and he's going to play a lot of different roles. So that's a guy I'll be watching at least through this first game, just to kind of see his comfortability with the offense and how his chemistry with Andy Dalton has developed at least early on. So those are the news and notes from training camp, and the things we'll be looking for in this preseason game number 1, as well as the players we'll be watching. It's time now to give the spotlight to Scott Scholesy, who, by the way, I've been mispronouncing his name for the past couple of weeks, so I apologize, Scott. I just thought it was Schultz, and I mispronounced it for a couple of weeks. I apologize about that, but it's Scholesy.
Teachers, and yes, Scholesy. I've had years of teachers and coworkers and everyone butcher it so long that I don't even notice it anymore. But after listening to the podcast a few times, I should probably mention that to Anthony.
You're probably shaking your fist in anger, I'm sure, when you listen. So I apologize. Again, this is the weekly segment, the Orange and Black Insider, Fantasy Football Insider, with Scott Scholesy, who last week talked about the running backs, and this week is going to talk about the quarterback. So, Scott, the floor is yours. Give us some fantasy advice, because, as you know, I'm going to jump into your league and use this advice against you.
And dominate, probably, because it is half luck.
That's right.
So, as Anthony said, last week we talked about the running backs. This week, I just have 3 quick points I wanted to mention about quarterbacks. One thing that I cannot stress enough is to read your league's scoring before you draft. Every league's a little different. Do you get points per reception? Do you get these silly bonus plays? Do you have field goals that count more than 3 points in some situations? We're talking about quarterbacks this week, so really look and see, do you get 4 points or 6 points for a passing touchdown? Most leagues do 4. Some, they'll get cute, they'll give 6. They might even give points per completion, or whatever your commissioners decide. Sometimes the commissioners have too much time and they just want to add bonus points here. Anyway, look and see what you get and how many points you get for your scoring. And the big thing with the passing touchdowns is if you get 4 points, which is generally standard, what you'll see is your running quarterbacks, your guys like Russell Wilson, Cam Newton have a lot more value because they're getting more points from the running game. And even someone like a Fitzpatrick who runs here and there, and even Cutler runs a little bit, their value goes up a little bit in proportion. Now, if you get 6 points per touchdown, the guys like the Tony Romos, the Carson Palmer, Tom Brady, and the guys who, if you're lucky, are going to run for 5 yards on the season, but throw a lot, they're going to have a little more value. So just one thing to keep in mind, it never hurts to look at your points and see how you're going to be scored before you pick people. Okay, on to the second point we had for the week. Peyton Manning, 2000 to 2003, he averaged 29 touchdowns. In 2004, he had the incredible 49 touchdown performance, set the NFL record, and then from 2005 to 2010, went back to 30 touchdowns a season. Tom Brady, 2001 to 2005, averaged about 25 touchdowns. And then in 2007, upped Manning's record and had 50 touchdowns. And then after that, he had a return to 28. He's been around 28 or 30 pretty much since then. The big point is don't chase last year's touchdowns. It's very rare for a quarterback to have just a monster season like that. When they do, they generally don't repeat it. And one of the reasons I mention that is Cam Newton. He averaged about 20, 21 touchdowns a year going into last year, and all of a sudden last year has 35 touchdowns. So like 60% higher than he'd ever had historically. And he still only threw for like 3,800 yards and completed under 60% of his passes. So if history shows anything, he's probably not going to get 35 again. I think a lot of people are drafting him really high, expecting he's going to be a 30, 35 touchdown guy. And I'm not saying he won't be, just historically, that doesn't seem to hold. And then another example of that would be Carson Palmer. Last year, he set career highs in touchdowns and yards. Dude's 35 years old. He's not getting any younger. We've seen he does have an injury history. So he's probably not going to hit that again. So just when you do draft quarterbacks, just don't be chasing last year's production, but kind of look at what you think they're going to do this year, because it's very rare that they keep that kind of performance up year after year. And the third point that I want to mention on fantasy football quarterbacks is, speaking of guys like Palmer and Newton, and then if you look at the kind of the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks that are going this year, you have guys like Rodgers and Cam Newton and Russell Wilson and Andrew Luck and the top 4 or 5, and I think Breeze is up there. And interestingly, after you get past that top 5 or 6, the next 10, 12 quarterbacks, based on the projections, are pretty much the same. I mean, there's not a whole lot of drop from guys like Rivers and Eli Manning and Carson and Derek Carr and Tannehill and Matt Ryan and Dalton and Brady and Fitzpatrick. All those guys, they're roughly about the same. You go to different sites, they're okay, one's a little higher, one's a little lower, but they're kind of in that same group. So the point is, if you don't take one of the first 5 quarterbacks, you can probably wait quite a while. You can probably wait till like round 9 or 10 to get your starter, which I know some people would really freak out if they waited that long. It's kind of a unique situation because you can get like a Tannehill or a Romo or someone, a hell of a lot later. Let someone go ahead and grab, Palmer or Eli in round 5 or 6 and just wait 4 or 5 rounds and grab someone who's just as good. Now, obviously, it's like they say with like the stocks and the mutual funds, I'm not guaranteeing this will happen. So if you do this and you lose, you can blame Anthony or Connor, but not me.
Yeah, I'll be the scapegoat. Appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem.
But if you feel comfortable doing that, I mean, if you recognize, point wise, Romo, Dalton, Winston, Tannehill, I really don't care who I have. I think they're all going to be the same. If you're comfortable with that and just getting whoever falls to you, I'd say go ahead and try it. See who's there in round 9 or 10. But if you really need to have your guy, need to have your quarterback, and you don't feel comfortable doing that, don't do it. From past experience, that's what I tend to be the last guy in my league to take quarterback, and I usually, grab someone like that, and it's worked really well. So it's just this year it's going to work, I think, amazingly well, unless you're in a league where they start drafting backups really quick. I've been in some leagues where they'll start drafting backups in round 6 or 7. If they do that, then okay, that wouldn't be a good strategy because then you're going to get stuck with like Jeff Goff or somebody or RG3. But if you're in a normal league, just something to consider, just something to toss. Maybe if you don't get one of those top few guys, just kind of linger, kind of hang around, wait, and to see who falls to you. In round 8, 9, or 10. And for Romo or Dalton or Tannehill or someone there, then hey, scoop them up and use those picks to get depth at positions like running back or receiver, and hopefully we'll be in the championship game. Unless you're in my league, then obviously I want to be in the championship game. But any league where I'm not in,
Yeah, buy low, hope for the best. I mean, Dalton and Bortles last year were two of the highest fantasy scores, and they both generally went undrafted for the most part. So.
Yeah, you see that every year a lot. Like,
go ahead, Scott.
now, this is going to say that you see that kind of every year. You see these guys who usually might be the 10th, 11th, 12th guy taken. Luck, when he had his big year, he was kind of low. Aaron Rodgers' breakout year, he was usually like the 10th or 11th quarterback taken. Yeah, a lot of these guys just go. You can get really good value if you wait, especially if you use those picks wisely. Now, if you're picking like a defense or a kicker in the 5th, 6th round instead of that quarterback, okay, you don't deserve to win. But if you're using it to get good depth at running back or wide receiver, then yeah, go for it. See what happens.
Do that.
Yeah, I've actually drafted Andy Dalton a number of times in late rounds in these 10, 12 team leagues, and it's usually come with pretty solid results, even though, because so many people that are non-Bengals fans have this certain perception of Dalton, and they just let him go throughout the draft, and he ends up actually producing pretty well for the most part. So, yeah, but that is the Fantasy Football Insider with Scott Scholesy. And it's courtesy of the Orange and Black Insider, which is presented by Cincy Jungle, of course. So, Scott, thank you for the sage advice. I can't wait to use it against you. It's time now for another segment we've been doing weekly, and it's the Bengals Hater of the Week. Initially, in our inaugural episode, it was Colin Cowherd of Fox Sports, who is a notorious Bengals basher, whether it was with Fox or with ESPN in his previous gig. He really likes to bang on the Bengals pretty hard, and that there was a couple of things. So check out episode number 1 about that. Last week we had a couple of guys, Dave Damashek of NFL Network and Frank Schwab of Yahoo Sports, who were slinging a little bit of mud at the Bengals. And this week it's not so much at the team itself, but the hater of the week is John Breach of CBS Sports, who has also been a bit critical of the Bengals in recent years and recent posts of his, and he has one that ranks the fan bases around the league. Now, in fairness to where I'm at, I don't think he's too far off, but it is still a slight against the Bengals, and we have to call out John Breach of CBS Sports because of his slighting of the Bengals fan base, and he ranks them at number 18 overall. It's almost kind of like how the media ranks their quarterbacks. It's almost kind of the Dalton ranking in terms of fan bases. So, Connor, your thoughts on Breach's comments about the Bengals? Obviously, he pointed out some of their more famous fans, Woody Harrelson, George Clooney. Those are some of their famous fans. But he points out their bad 1990s era and obviously their playoff failures. So any thoughts on this week's Hater of the Week in John Breach of CBS Sports?
Yeah, so for those who missed it, he basically said it's a minor miracle that the Bengals have any fans left after the 1990s. And then he throws in the condescending, thankfully the Bengals fans who didn't jump ship in the 90s have been in a row with 25 straight years with no playoff wins. Wait, that's not a record. That's not a reward. Oh, okay, well, great writing, man. You had me, head over heels laughing. Couldn't really say anything else. That wasn't that funny, but come on. I mean, that's the thing is basically that the Bengals are obviously going to just be anyone who makes any sort of rankings Bengals related is just going to throw them right in the middle of the pile and hope that no one notices, because that's generally how people seem to view the Bengals these days. And the whole bash about 25 straight years with no playoff wins. Well, look, the Jaguars were founded in the mid '90s or a couple couple years before that, they started off their existence with a 4-12 season followed by 4 straight playoff years. And in those 4 playoff years, they won a couple playoff games. I think they made it to 2 AFC championships. But if you're to ask fans who is a better team over the past 25 years, just random NFL fans, I would guess that 90% would say the Bengals have been the more successful team. Because ultimately, winning 1 playoff game, what is that going to do for the Bengals? Like, a good year is generally just like going to go forgotten unless it ends up with a Super Bowl trophy or a Lombardi trophy or a Super Bowl. Because I mean, that's ultimately what the goal is for these teams, right? Like, I hate it when people ask me the question, oh, well, is Marvin Lewis done if the Bengals don't win a playoff game this year? No, he's not, because the Bengals value Marvin Lewis and they're loyal to him. But that shouldn't even matter, because the question shouldn't be, are the Bengals going to win a playoff game this year? It should be, are they going to win the Super Bowl? Sure, they've had struggles winning a playoff game, but ultimately it just is going to come down to who's hoisting the Lombardi Trophy in February. Anything short of that is a bitter disappointment. And to just knock the fans for the fact that Woody Harrelson or George Clooney is a team's favorite, their biggest fan. Sorry, we don't have Jay-Z, but why would having Jay-Z on your side make you a better fan base? The Brooklyn Nets don't exactly have the best fans in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't 2 and 2 don't add up in this equation right here. So, congratulations, Breach, on your fantastic journalism. I'm actually now a CBS subscriber for because you've earned my subscription if CBS even has a subscription.
Any additional thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, first off, when I saw the who wrote it, I was kind of surprised, because if you're named Breach, you really have no business slamming the Bengals.
That's what I thought too. That's what I thought too.
I thought it was Jim Breach, because I saw Jay Breach. I'm like, Jim Breach wrote this? There's no way. But yeah, I don't know if he's his son, his cousin, uncle. I don't know who he is, but if he's related to Jim Breach, and even if he's not, I'm going to assume he is. And just for that, you can't slam the Bengals if your name's Breach. That's like being named a Sison and slamming them, or Collinsworth. There's certain names you just can't.
Those guys tend to do it actually pretty frequently themselves too. But so
yeah, after I said that, I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
One other thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
Connor had a good point. He mentioned the Jaguars, and one really good point about that is they have won playoff games. But if you look at the one team that, every year, who is the one team other than the Raiders, because they have the whole LA, Oakland, Las Vegas thing. The one team they always talk about moving is the Jaguars, because they just can't draw any of their games. So it's a newer team. It's you don't have the cold weather. You don't have the freezing temperatures where people don't want to go outside. You did have some early success, and they can't get anyone to go to the games. Bengals, on their hand, like you said, okay, you've gone 25 years without winning. You had a decade, or without winning a playoff game. You did have a rough decade, but yet, you had some. The fans still show up. You still have a lot of games where people are showing up. They're not always like they had a period where they weren't always sold out, but they have, for the most part, have done a pretty good job, and the voters of Hamilton County gave them that crazy, whatever you're going to call it, stadium deal, because they wanted the team to stay. So that shows a lot of now, whether it was financially reasonable, I don't. That's another issue. But the fact that they voted for them to stay, and to me, that's loyal fans. Hey, yeah, we know, and that was before they really had all this big winning. So this is right after that decade in the 90s. Hey, we had this horrible stretch of winning, but we still want you here, and we're going to give you this crazy deal. So to say that these fans are no good because they have because Nick Lachey likes them, or I don't know, that just makes no sense.
Yeah, I omitted. What's up, Connor?
You're good. Go for it.
Nick Lachey was another one of those celebrity names that they added in on the list there, and it's hard to. I think some of the points that Breach was making actually played into what the national audience saw when the Bengals played the Steelers on the wild card game, and there were people throwing beer cans at Ben Roethlisberger as he was being carted off of the field and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that kind of stuff also kind of plays into it. But overall, John Breach has earned his plaque now with Colin Cowherd, Frank Schwab, and Dave Damashek in our Haters of the Week for this week. So congratulations, John. I'm sure you'll be having a beer on.
And for what it's worth, the Steelers fans were. Yeah, for what it's worth, the Steelers fans were. I think 4 of them went to jail because they were beating up women or something like that.
Most definitely.
Yeah, great fans.
Most definitely. We're going to close up shop here, but we do have a big announcement. The show is now officially on iTunes, so you can find the Orange and Black Insider on iTunes as it is right now. You can also download and watch the show on Cincy Jungle directly from the posts we have. We're also breaking this show up into different segments to have them be a little bit more digestible if you want the fantasy football info, if you want some news and notes, all that good stuff. But we are on iTunes now. We've had some requests about that, and we've made it available to you through that. You can also check us out on SoundCloud and things like that too. So big news for us. I kind of feel I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit. I kind of feel like we're now official because we are part of the Apple community now. So guys, congratulations, and
it's like that blue check mark on Twitter.
That's right. I'm still waiting on that though. So
give me that.
Yeah. So I'll wait on that one. But for now, I'll take that the Orange and Black Insider is on iTunes. So download it, check it out on the website, and let us know what you think. That's gonna probably wrap it up for us. We had a great interview with Ted Glover of the Daily Norseman. Talking about the Vikings and the Bengals and their preseason game coming up here. So big thanks to Ted, and you heard all the ways you can follow him earlier in the episode. So check out his stuff. Check out the stuff this week, at least with the Daily Norseman for the Bengals and Vikings coverage of preseason game 1. We ran through news and notes. We gave you the hater of the week. We gave you some sage fantasy football advice that I'm jotting down to use against Scott as I get invited to his league. So
invite me too, man.
Yeah, that's right. We hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks again to Ted Glover of the Daily Norseman. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Episode 3 presented by Cincy Jungle. And check out all the stuff that we've been putting up, not only just us on this show, but many others behind the scenes as well that are putting up great content on Cincy Jungle that are following training camp, all of the news and notes that are going on. So check that stuff out. For Scott Scholesy, Connor Howe, I'm Anthony Cosenza for the Orange and Black Insider presented by Cincy Jungle. Have a good one, and hoo day.
Hoo day.
Hoo day.